Rivers do not drink their own water. Trees do not eat their own fruit. The sun does not shine on itself, and flowers do not spread their fragrance for themselves. Living for others is a rule of nature. We are all born to help each other. No matter how difficult it is, life is good when you are happy, but much better when others are happy because of you.
A very good afternoon too, and here is the latest news from across the continent of Africa. We start from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Ministry of Education, in collaboration with UNESCO, issued a report on Wednesday emphasizing the need to continue the reform of free education in the country to maximum student enrollment. The report showed that massive numbers of students have completed elementary school in the Democratic Republic of Congo compared to previous years. The elementary school completion rate has increased from 32% in 2000 to 71% in 2020. The report has further recommended an education budget increase, further training of teachers, more resource allocations, and an elaborate vision plan for the ministry. There are still 3.5 million children between the ages of 6 and 11 who are not enrolled in school in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and 73% of them leave elementary school without having acquired the necessary basic skills in French and mathematics. The provinces, the eastern part of the country, where millions of civilians have been displaced by fighting between the army and the rebels. It is the last round of voter registration ahead of the general election scheduled for December this year. The Independent National Electoral Commission said voters will be registered in the volatile province of Ituri and North Kivu, as well as in the US and Canada. Voter registration across the country started in December and has so far seen at least 12 million people registered as voters, and that is according to the Commission. The violence in the eastern part of the country is estimated to have displaced some 5.6 million people who are in dire need of food and shelter, according to the United Nations. We head over to Ethiopia. And security forces killed at least 3 people when they fired at people protesting against water shortage in the southern town of Wolkite, residents have told the media. Some 5 other people sustained injuries during the protest on Wednesday, they added. The residents, angered by worsening water shortage in the town, and held a protest in front of the city's water management office. The media has attempts to speak to district officials have not been very successful. We head over to Nigeria, and the latest. President Muhammadu Buhari has directed the country's central bank to release the old 200 naira banknotes back into circulation and run concurrently with the new ones till the 10th of April. The old 200 naira banknotes will then cease to be valid. Meanwhile, the old 500 and 1,000 naira banknotes are no longer valid and must be returned to the central bank in line with the new policy. There have been angry protests in towns and cities as people struggle to get hold of the new banknotes. Nigeria last year started circulating new designed 200, 500 and 1,000 naira notes. head back to Ethiopia, and a row within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the largest religious group in the country, has been resolved after a group of breakaway clergy held discussions with representatives from the main church, according to a statement from the church's leadership. Senior government officials, including Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, are said to have participated in the talks alongside elders appointed to reconcile the rival groups. The synod, the church's leadership, had previously accused the authorities of supporting the breakaway clergy, who are mostly from the Oromia region, where Mr. Abiy hails from. The state's rights watchdog, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, had accused security forces of applying excessive forces against followers of the main church. At least 8 people were killed in the town of Oromia. As tensions grew, lawyers representing the main church said hundreds of adherents had been detained, including some who were taken to an age. The breakaway clergy have now submitted a letter of apology to the synod, and they are expected to be welcomed back. According to the agreement, the 3 archbishops who had broken away from the church will keep their titles and reunite with the synod. The 25 clergy they had appointed will lose their recent titles and retain the ones they were holding before. We go to Tunisia, and the main opposition coalition has described the string of arrests targeting critics of President Kais Saied as repressive, violent, and legally baseless. In recent days, police have detained several prominent politicians, 2 judges, and a leading journalist and a senior union official. On Wednesday, the U.S. said it was deeply concerned by the reports arrest in the recent days. 18 months ago, President Saied cut down Tunisia's parliament and moved the rule by decree. Before rewriting the country's constitution, he has been accused of mounting a coup. The UN has voiced an alarm over the arrest, but the president has insisted those detained are traitors responsible for soaring price increases and severe food shortages. Head over back to Nigeria. 1 year after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, many companies in the emerging economies are feeling the pain. Bakeries in the country are one such example, as many have shut their doors, unable to afford the exorbitant price of the flour. Before the start of the conflict in Ukraine, which started in February of last year, flour was going for around 15,000 naira. That is about $33 US dollars, but today is at around 31,000 naira, about 68 US dollars. That marks an increase of about 136%. This is usually unstable for any business to survive. And we are still in Nigeria. And Nigeria's Department of State Services, DSS, has warned politicians not to publish false or harmful information in the run-up to the next week's presidential election. The warning came after the ruling All Progressive Congress Party's campaign director accused the military and an opposition candidate of plotting a coup. Fact-checkers are working overtime to debunk false news ahead of the February 25th elections. The notice to politicians was contained in a statement on Tuesday. The Department of State Services said political parties and their media managers must refrain from spreading misleading information during campaigns and when issuing communications. The DSS said such misinformation could lead to violent reactions and disrupt the peace and order in the country. The warning came in the wake of the agency's investigation of the campaign director for the ruling All Progressive Congress APC. Fani Kayode alleged on Twitter that the opposition People's Democratic Party presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar was planning a coup d'etat. The DSS interrogated Fani Kayode on Wednesday, and the media there could not immediately get comments from the service on the nature of that investigation. We go to Mozambique now. And a pastor died after fasting for 40 days, trying to reach the record reached by Jesus on the biblical Mount of Olives. The death of Francisco Baraja, the pastor and founder of the Santa Trindade Evangelical Church in the Central Province, Manica, was confirmed on Wednesday. He died while being treated at a hospital in Beira, where he was evacuated in critical condition. After 25 days of fasting, he had lost a lot of weight to a point where he could not stand up, bathe, or walk. Days later, at the insistence of relatives and believers, he was taken to a hospital, but attempts to get him back to health was unsuccessful. Believers at his church and his neighbors have been unsurprised at the turn of events due to his extreme weight loss and disfigured body frame in recent days. Okay, good for him. I don't know. It's very confusing, that story. Head over to Mauritius. And the government says it is providing a guarantee for all people of Chagosian origin who wish to resettle in Chagos archipelago to be able to do so. Chagosians were forced off the island by British troops more than 50 years ago. It comes after the rights watchdog Human Rights Watch accused the UK of crimes against humanity in its refusal to allow a group of islanders to return to the archipelago. The rights group said reparations should be paid to generations of people affected by the decision to depopulate the remote islands deep in the Indian Ocean. In the statement, Prime Minister Pravind Kumar thanked the Human Rights Watch for its extensive research and said it was committed to the implementation of an effective plan for resettlement. And on Tuesday, the country's Prime Minister we're in Central African Republic. The Prime Minister, jointly with the President of the National Elections Authorities and the head of the United Nations Mission in Central African Republic, MINUSCA, signed in Bangui a plan to ensure the safety of voters during the July polls. The Integrated Security Plan for the elections officially results of the constructive dialogue between the Central African Defense and Security Forces and the MINUSCA. According to the spokesperson of the UN chief, the UN mission continues to raise awareness on the elections and promote peace among local communities and authorities, notably in Hote Koto, Wuhan, and Ondja Koto prefectures, and it has provided specialized training on the protection of civilians to 25 defense and security forces operating in those regions. Initially scheduled in September 2022, local elections were postponed to January 2023, then to July 2023. So there's a high possibility, just as we get closer to July, they might postpone them further. I will not be surprised. We head over to Burundi. 4 human rights activists had been detained in Burundi while trying to travel to Uganda for a meeting with civil society organizations. Speaking on a condition of anonymity for fear of retaliation, witnesses at the Bujumbura airport and workers with security and the National Human Rights Commission told the Associated Press that agents of the National Intelligence Service made the arrest Tuesday morning. The reason behind the arrest was not immediately known. Such arrests have been common in recent years in Burundi, where watchdogs have accused the current and previous administrations of targeting critics and stifling dissent. And the president of that organization, the country's oldest human rights organization, has confirmed these arrests. Go to Libya now, and dozens of migrants are believed to have died in a shipwreck in Libya, with only 7 survivors found so far, the United Nations said on Wednesday. At least 73 migrants are reported missing and presumed dead following a tragic shipwreck off the Libyan coast, the UN's International Organization for Migration added. The boat, carrying 80 people, had departed Casa Al-Kaya, some 75 kilometers east of the capital Tripoli, and was heading to Europe. So far, 11 bodies have been retrieved but by the Libyan Red Crescent and the local police. The UN has confirmed that. Head now to South Africa, and a group of Ukrainian protesters have sailed a yacht close to a Russian warship docked in Cape Town ahead of South Africa hosted war games with the Russian and Chinese navies. Critics say South Africa's hosting of Russian warship for drills at the 1-year anniversary of its ongoing invasion of Ukraine pokes holes in its claim of neutrality. Military men in uniform stood on the deck of Russia's Admiral Gorshkov frigate Tuesday and watched protesters aboard a yacht with which bore the Ukrainian flag fearless. The group, 8, mostly women, shouted and held signs reading "Stop the War." The Russian news agency TASS quoted as an unnamed official saying the hypersonic Zikrock missiles carried by the Admiral Gorshkov would be test-fired during the drills. Because of their speed, the missiles cannot be detected by existing missile defense systems. The South African National Defense Force did not reply to request to confirm the test firing. And the latest from South Sudan, the Minister of Peace Building says the unity government is expediting the deployment of the necessary unified forces to some restive regions in the country. Stephen Parkour says some of the troops have already been deployed to maintain security in Warrap and Upper Nile. Speaking to local media in South Sudan, Par reiterated the government's commitment to speed up the full deployment of the forces in some parts of the country. Minister Par, who is also the Secretary General for the National Transition Committee, said the government is also working on the training and graduation of the second batch. In October last year, SSPDF Command deployed an unspecified number of troops to the Warrap-Abyei border following deadly intercommunal fighting. And in 2018, the revitalized peace deal expects the unity government to graduate about 83,000 unified forces drawn from the various parties to take charge of security during the ongoing transitional period. And then we end from Uganda. And the United Nations Rights Office said it was in discussion with Uganda over how to continue its work in the country after the government said it had to leave, a move activists say highlights the country's deteriorating record on civil liberties. The office was set up in 2006 and has brought to light widespread rights violations by security personnel, including torture, illegal detentions, and failure by the state to prosecute offenders. Uganda told the Office of the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights, OHCHR, last week that it would not renew the mandate of its office, effectively expelling the rights monitors. And according to the president, according to the commissioner, the UNHCR commissioner in Uganda, he said the conversation is being scheduled between the Commission and the President of the Republic of Uganda. And the High Commissioner's view is that there should be a UN human rights presence everywhere. The government said in a letter to OHCHR that the UN presence was no longer necessary because of the progress it had made in developing a domestic capacity to monitor human rights violations and compliance, including the emergence of a very strong civil society. And that marks the end of our news bulletin this afternoon. You are now up to date. Yeah, I think I was telling you about this story a couple of days ago. And Uganda says it has really worked on its part on ensuring that the country has strong institutions that address the issue of human rights. And also it noted that Uganda has made such strides as far as having a very strong civil society. And I wondered, when did this happen? And must have been somewhere very busy focusing on Burkina Faso and Mali, the Sahel region, that I forgot our neighbor here was making great progress as far as human rights is concerned. Now, that will be something. But if we can go back to the last elections, because usually during the electioneering period, during the campaign season, leading towards the date of the election, this is where normally you will see a heightened attacks on critics of the government, the opposition figures, and just targeted attacks. And others have even been taken to jail. Others, usually that will be the time that you will hear about Besigye. I haven't heard about him for quite a while now. So I think he's regrouping and recuperating. Remember, he was really, the government really acted on him the last time towards the other elections, together with Bobi Wine. So perhaps they're just gathering strength as they wait for the country, as they wait for their next elections, which I believe is in 2025. Now, I don't know if until then, because during that time we saw the blatant human rights abuses, and Ugandans were going on the polls, but you would have thought the country was going at war because of the heavy presence of the military in the streets, which was very scary. So I remember the last time Kenya was having its elections, August last year, and Ugandans were making fun, and they're just having a good time, and they're just wondering Is Kenya in Africa? Because people are going to cast their votes, and we don't have the presence of the military on the streets. First of all, the Kenyan military is no joke, and they have other things that they busy themselves with to make sure that the integrity of this country and protect us from foreign aggression. That is their job, and that's what they do. And every now and then you'll find them being sent in these peacekeeping missions and peace-building missions across Africa and indeed across the world. And so our military are supposed to be where they are, whether we are going to have an election, whether we are voting on that day or whatever is happening. So for you to see the presence of the Kenyan military, the KDF, anywhere in the streets of Nairobi or any other place in this country, just know the need for them there was really acute, not elections. So our military are very professional, men and women in uniform, and they're very respected. Even Kenyans, you don't joke around. You see a military, that's the government. You just find your way. Even when you find you're stuck with them on traffic, people just make way. You know, there's some level of respect the Kenyan military command, and they don't have to do anything, and they don't have to say anything. You just know a military guy is around. There is a military track. They're going on about their business, and you just leave them to do whatever it is. So they have a certain level of respect that we accord them. And the reason why we do that is because of how they carry themselves. So you will never, and that's why I think when you find a bit of politics finding its way into the security forces of this country, that makes me a bit anxious, because the Kenyan military has been known to be very professional, and that's how we know them. And we are safe in this country because we know we have a very able military, and who are professional, and who, in case of anything, will do whatever it can to make sure that we are safe and we are protected. So we are good. But in the case of Ugandan military, they usually work overtime. They take over the work of the police, they take over the work of other forces, and you'll see them actively spread across the towns and cities in Uganda during elections. It's just a misuse of the forces. It's a very heavily militarized presence. For what? People are just going to vote, and if others have a different opinion, people should be allowed to do that. But Uganda is saying, that's what we saw last time, which was not the case. But Uganda is saying the country has really grown, maybe since then, and there has been an emergence of strong civil society, and they're working on having they have capacitated the domestic human rights compliance. So they're good on that. They've been making progress. You know, I'd like to sit here and clap for that, because that is such a good move. And even here, we are not perfect. We are still making progress in that regard. I'm just hoping and praying it comes to a point where, we can fully have that. But we do have that. You can criticize the president. You can do whatever, as long as you're not being disrespectful, or you're not being out of order, or you're not violating the law. And it's fine. The headlines and the newspapers, sometimes, almost all the times, they're able to hold the fire to the president, and they will criticize, and they will evaluate his performance and all that, and they will do some fact checking and all that. So we have that healthy space. That is not perfect. It's still a work in progress, but we are slowly getting there, because also Kenyans are very aware, and Kenyans are fully present in the matters of this country. So it's very difficult right now for anybody, especially our leaders, to feel as if they can get away with stuff. It's not going to be possible, because we are aware and we recognize our place as far as running of the affairs of this country is concerned, as the Constitution has bestowed to us in the preamble. Go read that. With the people of Kenya, that's where it starts. So we have some good level of power. But away from that, but we're still a work in progress. Uganda, I'd like to believe what the government is saying sounds very good on paper and from the statement that the government is making. But is this how it really is as far as their practice and human rights compliance is concerned? So the United Nations High Commission for the Human Rights Office in Uganda, President Museveni had said, I think, thank you for your work. Your mandate is almost coming to an end in the country. We don't intend to renew it because we can handle these things that you're here in this country handling, because we have a local mechanism that is able to do the same thing that you're doing. So we don't need you here because we have evolved as a country, and we're doing great as far as human rights compliance is concerned. And so now this office is seeking to plead with the Ugandan government. And they're saying they're hoping to get an audience with the president, with the leadership of Uganda, President Museveni, because they're seeking to continue their work in the country, because the office was set up in 2006 and has brought a light in widespread rights violations. So you'll find that especially I've told you, such violations are usually very heightened towards the election period, and during the elections period, just 1 year before the elections, the chaos starts in Uganda, and I think even here, and it's just a thing across Africa, I guess. And during those days, it is this office that normally tells the world what happens, because the local commissions, the local organizations and institutions, you can't really do that because, your organization will be closed early in the morning, okay? So it is such an office that gets to shed light in what is happening there in light with the rights violations. And a lot of this has been by security personnel who have been accused of torture, illegal detentions, and the country has failed to prosecute offenders who have been found to be guilty or who have been found to be guilty of such offenses, because a lot of times it is allegedly they will be working with maybe their officials or maybe their security personnel, so they're working under certain orders. And I think the UN, I don't know if this is something that President Museveni would listen to, but in the morning as we were looking at some of the problems that hails Africa, Dr. Matanga brought up a point that could be one of the things that is lacking as far as our leadership is concerned, and that is leaders who are pragmatic. And leaders who are pragmatic, they are those who are realistic in how they approach issues. So I don't know if President Museveni, he might decide to be pragmatic in this regard, but it might not be in favor of this United Nations Commission for Human Rights, because I think they are already setting the tone and the ground for the elections. Why now? Why do you not want to renew their mandate? And this body has been acting as a very important institution for checks and balances, like I have explained there. And there's a lot to be expected and uncertainty. So maybe a section would assume, the government is just readying itself and setting a ground where whatever happens, there is no credible body that can actually tell the world what is happening. So if really you've truly worked on these things and the country has made strides in this regard, then you shouldn't be worried about this office existing in Uganda. And so the head of this commission in Uganda, Volker Turk, said that the OHCHR office should be having a presence across the world. This is an institution that should be allowed to operate across the world. There should be a UN human rights presence everywhere, and Uganda is not an exception. So I don't know what these talks will yield, and if President Museveni will be willing to renew their mandate and to allow them to still operate within the country, depending on how he feels his interests are. If at all their presence there is threatening his interest or the interest of the government, then most likely, as it has been in the past, then most likely maybe he will not agree to the renewal of their mandate, because he has already said that the country has structures to address some of these things and has made strides. And I like I said, I'd like to sit here and clap for that. But we know different. Maybe they've made some few changes, but they still have a long way to go. And until they get there, you shouldn't be worried. If that is the case, you shouldn't be worried of having this institution in your country. President Museveni, they will be complimenting your very wonderful institutions and your very vibrant civil society. He said the country has a vibrant and a very strong civil society. And I asked, which one? Google some for me. Must have missed that development and that news. What was I doing? I probably focused so much on Burkina Faso. I forgot to acknowledge that. But it is good. But also, let's have this other office complement the work of these other institutions in the country. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Another country that closed down the similar office is Burundi, and some activists were arrested. Burundi closed this office, the same office that Uganda wants to close down, during when President Pierre Nkurunziza was the president in Burundi. And Pierre Nkurunziza did not give any reasons. He didn't even care whether they had local mechanisms to address these issues or not. There was just a bother to him, and they stood on his way over the things that were happening in that country. And during that time, he even banned international media houses from accessing Burundi. And so he was just extreme. Okay, and so 4 human rights activists were detained in Burundi while trying to travel to Uganda for a meeting with civil society organizations. It's interesting. Civil society organizations are meeting in Uganda, so that's really great. So the government could be having a point, back to Uganda. The government could having a point, but still. So they were traveling, these human rights activists were traveling to Uganda to have a meeting with civil society organizations. And speaking on condition of anonymity for fear of retaliation, witnesses at the Bujumbura airport and workers with security and the National Human Rights Commission told the press that the National Intelligence Service had arrested these 4 human rights activists in the morning. So it's quite something there. And such arrests are very common in Burundi. I'm not really surprised, but I was just hoping that President Evariste Ndayishimiye could be a bit different from, could operate differently from what we used to see President Pierre Nkurunziza operate. But you would think that if you didn't understand the history of Burundi. And you know, before Pierre Nkurunziza died, just before the elections, and Pierre Nkurunziza, Evariste Ndayishimiye, the current president, had already been nominated as the flag bearer of the party of Pierre Nkurunziza. He was not going to run again, so he died, I think, here in Nairobi. There were rumors that he died from COVID, but we really don't know what happened to President Pierre Nkurunziza. He died and that was it. We've not known what happened. We really don't know. So the current president came to power. So I guess he's just continuing with what former president was doing, because they were in the same party. So I guess they were sharing the same values as far as leadership is concerned. And he has continued. So there were some hopes that perhaps he will act different. He will handle certain issues differently. But it appears Ndayishimiye is just walking in the footsteps of former President Pierre Nkurunziza. So another country to look out for there across the continent. All right, I don't want to say so much. The issue of misinformation, that is a conversation in Nigeria, that is a conversation we'll have another time. I want to thank you so much for your time this afternoon. This has been Diaspora Dispatches. My name is Miriam Mugutu. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Rivers do not drink their own water. Trees do not eat their own fruit. The sun does not shine on itself, and flowers do not spread their fragrance for themselves. Living for others is a rule of nature. We are all born to help each other. No matter how difficult it is, life is good when you are happy, but much better when others are happy because of you.